In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King takes part in a NATO summit this week that will discuss global challenges. The planning minister says Jordan needs $4.5 billion to deal with the influx of Syrian refugees. And the US president formally notifies Congress that he authorized targeted airstrikes in Iraq, where Kurdish and Iraqi forces are gaining grounds from IS militants. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King will attend a NATO summit that will take place in the United Kingdom on Thursday and Friday. The periodic summit is an opportunity for heads of state and government of NATO member nations to discuss various global challenges. Jordan, which enjoys an advanced partnership status with NATO, is bound by a number of agreements with the alliance and is seen as a partner in promoting global peace and stability. On the sidelines of the summit, King Abdullah will meet a number of heads of state and dignitaries to discuss ties with the kingdom and means to enhance relations in various fields. Also during his UK visit, King Abdullah will hold talks with Prime Minister David Cameron and other British leaders on ways of boosting Jordanian-British ties in various fields. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, called on the King Abdullah III Armoured Division, where he was welcomed by the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mash'al al-Zabin, and senior officers. The division's commander briefed the King on operational, training, logistical and technical matters, as well as the combat preparedness of the formations and units of the division. King Abdullah also opened the new premises of the 5th Royal Tank Battalion, which includes a number of military, administrative and technical facilities. He also attended a drill carried out by the 5th Royal Tank Battalion that displayed the high level the units had reached. The exercise comes as part of the Armed Forces strategy to raise the unit's training and operational capabilities. Also during the visit, King Abdullah reviewed a number of modern vehicles that were recently introduced to the armed forces. He voiced his pride in the Jordan Armed Forces personnel and the distinguished level they had attained. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, Peter Mora, and an accompanying delegation to discuss Jordan-IRCR cooperation and regional developments. Mansour voiced Jordan's appreciation of the assistance the ICRC provides to targeted groups in the kingdom and the region, particularly Syrian refugees. He said the direct cost of hosting the Syrian refugees in Jordan is estimated at $3 billion, noting the pressure the crisis poses on the water, education, health and service sectors in host communities. During the meeting attended by Minister of Water and Irrigation Hazem al-Nasser, Mansour said the influx of refugees had exacerbated the water problem in the kingdom. Talks also dealt with developments in the region, mainly the Palestinian issue and the situation in the Gaza Strip. Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Judeh also met the ICRC president and stressed the need to find a political solution in Syria that safeguards the country's security and unity. He said a political solution is the only way to end the humanitarian crisis and guarantee the return of the refugees to their countries. Minister of Planning and International Cooperation Ibrahim Saif said Jordan needs the amount of $4.5 billion in foreign aid to help it deal with the influx of Syrian refugees. He said, speaking at the 5th meeting of the Host Community Support Platform, the HCSP in Amman. The minister said the cabinet had approved projects included in the National Plan 2014-2016 to empower local refugee host communities. Saif also announced the launch of the 2015 National Plan to address the Syrian crisis and its impact on the kingdom. He said projects in 11 sectors have been prepared in cooperation with donor parties and the international community to determine requirements of the Jordanian government. The national plan includes a request for $4.5 billion that will be distributed to sectors such as education, health, energy, municipal, water, housing, labor, environment, transportation and justice. Participants hailed Jordan for providing services and accommodation to a large number of refugees.
Very impressed about the generosity of the government of Jordan to host the Syrian refugees, and we are also very pleased with the support that has been provided by the Jordanians in accommodating the Syrian refugees.
The Jordan Hashemite charity organization sent a 20-truck aid convoy to the Gaza Strip. The trucks were laden with food packages to be distributed to the Palestinians in the blockaded coastal enclave. Secretary General of the organization, Ayman Mifleh, said the organization will continue to receive aid from citizens, civil society institutions, as well as local and international organizations to be sent to the Gaza Strip. In other news, Israel's latest land grab in the occupied West Bank draws further condemnation. Israel has announced the expropriation of about 1,000 acres at a Jewish settlement near Bethlehem and declared it state land. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's spokesman Nabil Aburdene said the land appropriation for expansion of Gvaot settlement would cause the situation in the region to deteriorate further. Aburdene noted that the settlements in general are illegal. Washington has called the land appropriation counterproductive to Israel's stated goal of a negotiated two-state solution with the Palestinians. It said the government of Israel should reverse this decision. U.S. President Barack Obama formally notified Congress that he had authorized targeted airstrikes in Iraq to help deliver a humanitarian aid to the besieged Shiite town of Amerli. Iraqi security forces backed by Shiite militias broke the 2-month siege of Amerli by Islamic State militants and entered the northern town. Shiite fighters also entered the town of Suleiman Pek near Kirkuk. Here's more.
Kurdish troops backed by a Shiite militia and Iraqi forces are gaining ground from Islamic State or IS militants in the country's north. The town of Suleiman Pek, south of Kirkuk, fell to the Shiite Asa'ib al-Haq militias and Kurdish Peshmerga fighters backed by support from the Iraqi Air Force. The forces were exchanging fire with IS fighters and conducting a house-to-house search operation. Another town, Amerli, was captured by the Iraqi forces last night. Caretaker Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki visited Amerli, whose capture ended a 2-month siege of the town by the militants. The advance of the Iraqi forces came after the US military carried out airstrikes on IS militants' positions near the town and airdropped humanitarian supplies by the British, French and Australian planes. Maliki said Iraqi forces had a huge strategic victory over the militia fighters, pledging that services will be restored to the town.
I understand your suffering. Therefore, to reward the people of the town, the coming few days will see the delivery of food and the provision of electricity and services to the town.
In Geneva, members of the Human Rights Council were told of strong evidence of crimes including targeted killings and torture from IS forces and linked groups. The Iraqi Human Rights Minister told the 47-member state forum that the rebel movement was a threat to countries throughout the world. The UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights said Iraqi police have executed detainees while Iraqi soldiers have shelled towns and carried out airstrikes, killing and injuring many civilians. The Council is expected to agree to a request from Baghdad to send a team of UN experts to the region to investigate war crimes and human rights abuses committed by IS forces and others. Luay Balkar for the news at 10.
And in neighboring Syria, heavy fighting between Syrian army forces and rebels erupted on the Golan Heights. But it was unclear if either of the two sides had gained an advantage to control a key frontier crossing. Rebels of Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front have been battling the Syrian army in the area and have taken control of the crossing at Quneitra, which is operated by the United Nations. Persistent small arms fire and explosions from mortar shells and other munitions could be heard in the area. The fighting came as a day after Israel's military said it shot down a drone that flew from Syria into airspace over the Golan Heights. it was not immediately clear who sent the aircraft or the nature of its mission. As the conflict raged in Syria and Iraq, Prime Minister David Cameron announced plans to strip suspected Islamist militants of their passports temporarily. The measure is to combat the threat posed by radicalized Britons returning from Syria and Iraq.
First, stopping people from travelling in the first place. Mr. Speaker, passports are not an automatic right. The Home Secretary already has the discretion to issue, revoke and refuse passports under the royal prerogative if there is reason to believe that people are planning to take part in terrorist-related activity.
Libya's House of Representatives reappointed Prime Minister Abdullah Thini as the government lost control of ministries in the capital. Armed groups have taken over and a separate parliament has claimed legitimacy. An alliance led by forces from the western city of Misrata seized control of the capital last week. Parliamentary spokesman Faraj Hashim said 64 of the 106 representatives present had voted for Thini, and the House had instructed him to form a crisis government within a period of time not exceeding 2 weeks. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry called Thini before his appointment to give his support. Both stressed the need for national dialogue and reconciliation. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif met European Council President Herman Van Rompuy and European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton for talks over Iran's nuclear program. Ashton coordinates in a group of 6 global powers negotiating with Tehran. The two sides have failed to meet a July 20 deadline to negotiate a comprehensive agreement under which Iran would curb its nuclear activities in exchange for the easing of economic sanctions that have crippled its economy. Zarif was later set to meet with the European Parliament President Martin Schulz and Belgian Foreign Minister Didier Reynders. Pakistani security forces secured the state television headquarters in Islamabad after a crowd of anti-government protesters stormed the building and took the channel off the air. Protesters led by opposition leaders Imran Khan and a firebrand Muslim cleric have been on the streets for weeks, seeking to bring down the government of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Protests descended into deadly chaos over the weekend. This report has more.
Violence that broke out during anti-government protests in Pakistan over the weekend continued on Monday. Demonstrators carrying sticks and rocks clashed with police again as they tried to force their way into the Prime Minister's residence. Police responded by firing tear gas at the crowd. Protesters demanding Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's resignation have been holding mostly peaceful demonstrations for weeks, but the situation turned deadly over the weekend when they tried to storm the residence. At least 3 people were killed. On Monday, the protesters also broke into the PTV national television headquarters in Islamabad. Its national channel and English language service were taken off the air. The army was called in to restore order. Sharif is due to address both houses of parliament on Tuesday. He has refused to resign, but he has agreed to meet other demands, such as an investigation into allegations of fraud during last year's election.
Ukraine's military said it had pulled its forces back from defending Donetsk airport in the east against Russian tanks. The withdrawal was the latest in a string of reverses from Ukrainian forces fighting pro-Russian separatists. President Petro Poroshenko said Russia's direct involvement in Kiev's war against the separatists had tipped the balance on the battlefield and was the main reason for recent setbacks. He accused Moscow of direct and open aggression. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said Ukraine's political leaders expect a new parliament to abandon the country's non-aligned status after an election next month in a possible prelude to an application to join NATO.
If the parliament passes a legislation that removes the non-alliance provision, then I would expect Ukraine to raise the issue with NATO within the NATO-Ukraine Commission. And based on that, Ukraine and NATO will then work out a plan for further development of the NATO-Ukraine partnership. But
Moscow's Red Square has been the venue of the international military band's festival Spasskaya Bashnia. The opening show saw over 1,500 military musicians from all over the world. Bands from Serbia, Armenia, Ireland, Turkey, Kazakhstan, China and Italy, along with Russian President's military band, took part in the opening ceremony on Red Square. Festival organizers claim that the event gathers the best artistic groups and musicians from across the world. Performers wear traditional uniforms and play folk instruments. The festival, which kicked off on Saturday, will last 5 days, with military bands performing in various parts of Moscow throughout the day and with daily evening shows on Red Square. Real Madrid have agreed to sign Mexico striker Javier Hernandez on loan from Manchester United for the 2014-15 season. Real have an option to buy the 26-year-old, and he would be presented to the media at the Bernabeu Stadium later in the day. To the US Open, Denmark's Carolina Wozniacki cruised past Maria Sharapova 6-4 to 6-6-2 to move into the quarterfinals of the tournament. Wozniacki broke the French Open in the final game to return to a Grand Slam quarterfinal for the first time since the 2012 Australian Open. And on the men's side, Roger Federer came back with renewed vigor after a weather delay to beat Spaniard Marcel Granollers 4-6, 6-1, 6-1, 6-1. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. It will be fair tonight in most regions across the kingdom, with northwesterly fresh winds. A slight drop in temperatures tomorrow will create mild conditions across most regions, including the desert areas. But it will remain hot in the Jordan Valley, with a high of 37 degrees at the Dead Sea. Winds will be northwesterly brisk. Hot weather is also forecast for Aqaba, with northerly fresh winds and slightly rough seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Now our top stories once again. His Majesty the King takes part in a NATO summit this week that will discuss global challenges. The planning minister says Jordan needs $4.5 billion to deal with the influx of Syrian refugees. And the US president formally notifies Congress that he authorized targeted airstrikes in Iraq, while Kurdish and Iraqi forces are gaining ground from IS militants. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad Btoush. Thank you for your company.